Samurai Champloo is probably one of the coolest things to ever grace our known existence. Nothing could beat the feeling of being up way too late on a school night watching Adult Swim. You're laughing at Loiter Squad, you're crushing on Yoruichi, you're questioning your existence to whatever the this was, and then your untrained eyes and ears are met with this. This is the coolest thing to ever fuck. What's up? It's me, your favorite internet roommate. And I don't think there's a single thing that embodies the Adult Swim spirit more than Champloo. In the marketplace of vibes, Champloo is in its own stratosphere. Put this in front of anybody, they gotta find it cool. And if they don't, those aren't the kind of people I want to hear from anyway. Everything from the beautiful, washed out, striking visuals that perfectly encapsulate the personalities of all the main characters, to the spacey, pulsating Nujabes production and Shingo 2's distinctive voice and bars about overcoming adversity and just living the life of a samurai, and specifically the lyrics. The elements compose a magnum opus, my modus operandi is amalgam? What the fuck? And while Champloo has a lot of cool qualities, from the iconic, unforgettable character designs to the well-choreographed, engaging fights, but I think more than anything, why people remember Samurai Champloo, why they connect to it, and why it's so fucking cool like that, is the music. But not just the music alone, but specifically next to these visuals. It was the bold choice of mixing these wildly contrasting elements of samurais and hip-hop that creates this unexpected harmony and vibe that is Samurai Champloo. But here's the thing, I think anyone can see how cool this cross-cultural mix is just by looking at it, but me, a coolologist with a master's in vibenomics, I want to go deeper. I want to talk about why this cultural mix is so cool. Analyze the coolness, if you will. Because the choice of having hip-hop music goes so much deeper than just, you know, having cool music. So as always, pop a squat, roomie. I'm going on another passionate tirade. And I think the best place to start that tirade is talking about the... Now, the most important thing about this series is in the title, the word Champloo, which is a play on the Okinawan word champaru, which refers to an Okinawan dish of contrastingly mixed foods. But in the context of this story, it means to mix. And this idea of mixing is the core theme and heart of this entire series. Hence the choice of using hip-hop, as it's something that doesn't normally mix with samurai culture. But you can go even a layer deeper than that, considering hip-hop is a genre known for sampling and mixing other genres and sounds to create something entirely new. Now, if you know anything about our director here, the GOAT, Shinichiro Watanabe, bro is the master of crafting cool shit. If I could like put all his work under a single moniker, genre, I would call it cool shit. And music plays a quintessential role in everything he does. You see this in his prior work with the classic Cowboy Bebop, it being a mix of space westerns and jazz music. It's just a cool thing to mix unlikely things like video games and learning. Which is exactly what Bootdev is building. Basically, they're gamifying back-end development. You can't learn to code without actually writing a lot of code, but writing a lot of code can get boring, and that's what Bootdev is here to help with. They'll be teaching you back-end development from start to finish in the Python and Go programming languages, but doing it all in the context of it being a game, as you can see here. I'm learning coding, but I'm also doing quests. I'm earning XP, levels, achievements. There's even bi-monthly boss fights where the community rallies together to gain bonus XP. And ultimately, I just really mess with the whole premise of what Bootdev is trying to do. I genuinely think that gamifying education is the future of learning. This shit made me feel like a kid playing cool math games, you know what I mean? So if you're at all interested in learning how to code and having a future in backend development, go to boot.dev and use my code InternetPitstop to get 25% off your first entire year if you go with the annual option. Thank you, boot.dev, and back to the video. Around the time of making Champloo, Watanabe was listening to a lot of hip-hop. And as he was listening, the rough idea of Mugen was created. Originally, he was supposed to be a full-on, like, rapping samurai. But then he changed his mind and decided to go more subtle with his approach. And having that element actually blend it with the show's DNA, its characters, its world. Which would lead Watanabe to gathering the team of musicians and producers that would create the sound of Champloo. Tsutchie, Fat John, Force of Nature, and of course the late Nujabes. Now real quick, it is important to mention that this isn't the first time that this unique blend of hip-hop and samurai aesthetics would be mixed together, as you had films like Ghost Dog. Starring Forrest Whitaker, it tells the story of a hitman in the city living his life through the way of the samurai. Its music was done by the legendary RZA of the Wu-Tang Clan, even having features from the other Wu-Tang members. And RZA said himself that he didn't think samurais and hip-hop could go so well together. But during the making of this film, he found the connection to be poetic. And that idea of this connection being poetic, I think really shines with Champloo's soundtrack. And because the soundtrack is so important, I think it's crucial to understand that while Nujabes tends to be the most talked about and credited for its sound, and while it's true he is a standout and important factor of it, not enough people talk about the other artists that contributed to the soundtrack, as they all play a monumental role in its influence. And again, the main theme of this series is the idea of mixing. So you wouldn't have the sound you have here without the mix of all of these particular artists. So let's talk a little bit about each of them and what they contributed to the sound, starting with rapper and producer from Ohio and a member of the group 5Ds. If you've been a fan of Nujabes, you've probably heard him on a few of Nujabes' albums. And when I spoke earlier about how I think these other artists don't get enough credit compared to Nujabes that are on this soundtrack, I feel that especially with Fat John, as I think next to Nujabes, he provides some of the best tracks on this OST. And I also really mess with his solo work. I would highly recommend you guys check out these two albums if you really mess with this sound that comes from the soundtrack. His tracks bring a real meditative trance-like quality to the soundtrack. They're low-key, but always have a good rhythmic drum pattern that never takes you out, but rather fades you into that trance. My favorite piece that he did is easily How You Feel. It samples the 70s Chick Corea song Crystal Silence, and the way Fat John slows that sample and warps it throughout this track, it gives it this ghostly kind of ethereal quality. And that shit does something to me, man. And when the drums come in, I'm on a beach at night, sitting by the water as it's slowly grazing my feet. I'm definitely smoking a blunt. I'm alone, but I'm at peace. Real solace type shit. Are y'all hearing this beat? This shit is slick, it's cold, it's murderous. I feel like when I listen to it, I feel like I'm gonna be on some illegal activities. Like, ooh, I'm about to drive 5 miles above the speed limit type shit. And I can confirm that this track definitely bumps in the whip. Force of Nature is a hip-hop and production duo from Japan, and I feel they provide the most diverse palette of sounds throughout this OST. You have high-energy bangers like his Voodoo Style. You got those more dark, rough around the edges, industrial cuts like Death Wish. There's a few of those tracks that are just them going bananas on the drums. They also created some of the most exciting, like blood-pumping, percussion-led tracks that perfectly fit the fights of Champloo. Picking a favorite among them was a bit tough. I almost went with Same Old Thing, that last track that plays during Jin's final fight. It's such an iconic song that has this grand finality to it, but ultimately I had to go with Just Forget Forget. The main melody samples the very beginning of 1972's The Blossom song, Just Remember. The drums from 1975 Dirty Feet by the Daley Wilson Big Band, and that little horn part is from Sweetie Pie by 1976's Stone Alliance. I don't know what they did to the sample, but at least to me it sounds like something very traditionally Japanese, but it isn't. It makes me feel like I'm just chilling in a personal little forest haven, covered all around and canopied. There's a slight wind in the air, animals, butterflies, flowers, just chilling everywhere. Outside of Nujabes' stuff, I feel like this is the most memorable track on the whole soundtrack for me. Tsutchie is a member of the influential Japanese hip-hop group Shaka Zombie, and the music he makes typically has an upbeat and plucky feel to it. And I say this in the best way, his music feels the most background sounding to me. And by that I mean it's basically the foundation of the soundtrack. I feel like they take up most of the soundtrack, and it's what I hear most of the time when I'm watching Samurai Champloo. It's basically the music that plays when like two characters are just having a conversation or something. Regular everyday type shit. It's stuff I imagine being the backing track to like a chill stroll with your friends on a breezy sunny day. Real slice of life type beat. But my favorite track that he did has to be Two Messages. Just the bittersweet but pleasant sound of the guitar strings and the drums. The sound feels like the essence of life goes on, nothing lasts forever. Maybe you've parted ways with some people, you know, you've grown apart, so you're like a little sad, but then it's also like you're thinking about all the great moments you two shared together, and you know, there's a pleasantness there now. I don't think it's crazy to say that Nujabes' sound has kind of surpassed the legacy of this series. And some of that might come from his unfortunate, untimely passing at such a young age. But there's a reason that so many people connected to his music. In fact, Watanabe was actually an early fan of his, listening to some of his first couple singles. And specifically with Champloo, Watanabe wanted a sort of 50-50 ratio between the music and the visuals. And for even at times, the music to overpower the visuals. And he felt that Nujabes was the perfect person to make music that powerful. Jun Seba, or Nujabes, was born February 7th, 1974, and his pops was actually an amateur jazz pianist, which is where a lot of his musical background and appreciation came from. So much so that when he got older, he would eventually open his own record store, Guinness Records, which basically became a haven for the underground Japanese hip-hop scene. But Nujabes wasn't just a crate digger, allowing him to find some of the most obscure samples. He was also a fan of 90s hip-hop, and at least from what I could gather from research and interviews, he had a particular affinity for 90s boom bap hip-hop, which given his jazz background makes a lot of sense. If you listen to a lot of instrumentals from 90s boom bap hip-hop, they sample a lot of 70s jazz and soul music. Some of the confirmed influences we know that Nujabes had were legends like DJ Premier and Pete Rock, and he basically created the Bible when it comes to making hip-hop instrumentals, in my opinion. And if you like Nujabes' music, I feel like his sound fits real nicely in the families of Tribe Called Quest, Gangstar, RZA, Madlib, and most probably, importantly, Jay Dilla, who he shared a birthday with. And it was at this record store that Nujabes would put out his first official bootleg. He did a remix of Nas's One Love under the alias Dimension Ball. He put it on a vinyl and snuck it into his own Nas record section. So when people came in, they saw it thinking it was some already known artist, grabbed it, and they loved it. And they would go up to him and ask him who was this? He basically pulled a physical version of what Soulja Boy did with LimeWire. He would eventually start his own record label, from which he would contact artists from all across the globe to bring in their sound. Like Substantial from Maryland. There's plenty of interviews where he talks about how he first met Nujabes and how it was so weird to get a call from someone from Japan, asking you to make music with him.
And I get this phone call. Now, for those of you who don't know, my friends are clowns. Straight fucking clown shoes. They're crazy. And so I answer the phone, and I hear this thick accent on the other line, and it's Nujabes. Now at the time, this is before everybody was hip. So like I didn't know who he was, and I know my friends are clowns, so I thought it was one of my friends being a dickhead. So I almost hung up the phone on Nujabes. He's like, hello, this is my Nujabes imitation. I'm not trying to offend anybody. This is really how he sounds. Okay? Hello, may I speak to Substantial? Hey man, stop playing, man. Stop playing. I'm tired, man. No, please. I am a big fan of your music, and I would love to send you some beats.
And I think this is part of why Nujabes is the perfect choice for being part of this soundtrack. Nujabes' sound wouldn't be where it is if it wasn't for cross-cultural mixing. Him being Japanese, growing up in Japan, but loving hip-hop, his willingness to gather other cultures, gather other people to mix together to make a different sound. That sound would eventually become his first album, Metaphorical Music, but also what would become the sound that fits so perfectly onto Champloo, a story about mixing unlikely things. And a lot can be said about the sound and texture of Nujabes' music. He sampled only from analog records and not CDs, as there was this warmth and comfort that came from that rough quality of sound. But I mean, he sampled from all over. Japanese jazz, soul records, traditional Japanese music, ambient music, even at times including real life elements like running water, rain, fireworks, bossa nova, or Brazilian music. And eventually he started to add in real instrumentation like piano or when he would play the flute. But I think the clearest example on this soundtrack of his mastery of sampling is probably the most popular track from the soundtrack that went on to even become more popular than probably the series itself. There's something so beautiful about the sound of this track, and it just feels so rich. And a big part of that comes from the fact that its sampling thread can be followed over a century of music. The original song was Pavane for a Dead Princess by Gabriel Fauré, which was made in 1899. Then 40 years later, we get the song The Lamp is Low by Mildred Bailey. That song had fragments of Pavane's song from 1899. Then in 1969, the Brazilian guitarist Laurindo Almeida does a cover of Mildred's version, and this version is the version that Nujabes would eventually sample. But if you listen to Nujabes' version, you can hear pretty much all the elements from each of these songs throughout the years. It's a beat that carries the elements of a century of musical history. And since here, it's only continued its legacy, as this song is everywhere now. For one, in the mid-2010s, you could not watch a single anime video essay without this song being in the background, or even now being the soundbite of like every Hope Core TikTok. Like if you're ever on the what they call positive side of like Instagram or TikTok, which kind of came about after the Vinland Saga, I have no enemies meme, this song is used a lot, usually using visuals from mangas like Vinland Saga, Berk, or Vagabond. Which, isn't it kind of cool that a song from Samurai Champloo is now associated with the Vagabond manga? I don't know, there's something real like poetic about that. First off, the sound of this song is sublime. That very beginning sample loop, it's serene. It really puts you in an introspective, meditative state. I feel like I'm meditating in an empty, windy grass field type beat, but the deeper I listen, the more I go to other places. I legit feel that if you listen to this when you're like angry or you have a lot of hate that you were holding, you can feel it evaporating away. And suddenly you turn into a fucking philosopher and you want to start saying shit like, in the midst of hate, I found that there was love within me, an incredible love. Then suddenly you're swept away by the drums coming in like a leaf just gracefully took you. This shit makes me feel like water running through a river, air passing through trees. It brings me to peace and makes me realize how just relaxing a day can be sometimes. And no joke, it's hard to feel anxiety when you're listening to this. There's this nostalgic, teary-eyed sweetness to its sound, similar to like that morning dove. It's wholesome. It feels like a warm, compassionate hug or smile. And I know to some this might sound like a little silly, but legit, look at any comment section about this song and you'll find the exact same sentiments of what I'm saying. It's why this song became part of the soundtrack of memes that are supposed to be about being kinder and more gentle people, because art has the ability to make us look at our life more positively. I know I do when I hear this. I never more appreciated the way nature just be naturing, you know? Like, wow, look at the way those leaves sway in the wind. Look how the sun is peeking through the trees almost like a painting. Or the way all those birds be like chilling again. But even his low-key cuts stand out in the track list. I think of tracks like World Without Words or Space Between Two Worlds. Or an absolute favorite of mine, Mist Line. There is something so somberly pretty about this song. It's melancholic, it's lamentful, but it still feels like there's a silver lining built into the sound. It's simple, but it derives and evokes so much emotion in me. And I think that's the key thing about all of Nujabes' music. You can find quotes from Shingo 2 or another one of his friends, Tori Hashimoto. And both of them speak about how his production was so deceptively simple. He had this phrase that he would always say when it came to how he sampled. He was always trying to find the best 2 bars. And he typically paid attention to the loops, especially the melodic loops, the melodic parts of the songs, as he felt the melody is where you can pull and sample most of a song's emotion. And I think that is the most important part of his soundscape. His music had such a way of expressing heart and vulnerability, which allows us as listeners to slip into any vibe he's created, which then opens the door for us to connect the music to whatever we're feeling. At times of anguish, his music would console me. At times of me stressing, his music brought me tranquility. And at times of my happiness, his music would brighten and motivate. According to Nujabes' A&R, Masakaze Takeuchi, Nujabes said that he went through a lot as a child and was a very vulnerable person. And he feels that Nujabes made music to strike a chord in people's emotions through that vulnerability. And he was also a practicing Buddhist who believed in the power of music to heal and uplift. That's why I would describe his music as a safe space. It's like having a friend that you feel comfortable being vulnerable to. And learning this stuff about Nujabes' life and his philosophy and how it connected so much to the sound of his music, it got me thinking about one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite rappers of all time, Mos Def. He said something along the lines about how art doesn't imitate life, but instead that art is the expression of life. And thus, art and life are never separate. Whatever people are going through will be and exist in their art. And for me, music like J Dilla's or Nujabes' has kind of become the soundtrack to life. It's honest, it's genuine, and it has a lot of pathos. And though he wants to ultimately uplift his listeners, but what I love about his music is that it doesn't shy away from the darkness of life. It acknowledges it as part of the mix. In his music, you'll hear longing, you'll hear melancholy. It's always there in the undercurrent of the songs. But constantly, also in that mix, is hope. And that mix of sounds tells you, yeah, life sucks sometimes. It gets dark and you're gonna fall sometimes. But then it reminds you that you can always get up and try again, and you should. His music beautifully treads the silver lining of melancholy and hope, which is the essence of the contradiction of the human condition. His music in that way personifies the human condition. You know what I mean? Like who uprolling their bowl? More than anything, his music is profoundly, unapologetically human. And though his time is no longer with us, we can continue to celebrate his life through his art. He lives through the influence, through the art. He rests in these beats. And his willingness to mix so many different sounds and cultures into his music is why I think so many different walks of life can connect to it. Hence why from the anime on, it became so influential. I remember hearing it along with J Dilla's music all over Adult Swim's like bumps and just commercials. And I would literally see with my own eyes as time went on, and eventually Nujabes' music and J Dilla's music went on to influence an entire subgenre of hip-hop with lo-fi hip-hop, which has become basically its own entire thing at this point. Now look, lo-fi used to just mean like low fidelity music. Sound which came from artists who didn't have the most, studio equipment at home because they were making the beats at home. But the meaning of it's changed now because lo-fi hip-hop is more of just like an entire sound and mood. And it's huge. I can't imagine how many people couldn't study if they didn't have Lo-Fi Girl there to like console them. And constantly I read and I hear about how Nujabes and Dilla are the godfathers of lo-fi hip-hop. But here's the thing. I like lo-fi, and there's plenty of artists who make lo-fi that I enjoy. And it is undeniable that Dilla and Nujabes and the Samurai Champloo soundtrack had a huge influence in making lo-fi hip-hop what it is today. But I don't like calling Nujabes and Dilla the godfathers of this subgenre, because it kind of says without saying it, and kind of like implies the idea that Nujabes and Dilla made lo-fi hip-hop, like they make that kind of music. And I mean no offense to people who make lo-fi hip-hop, but if you listen to lo-fi hip-hop, it's the influence, but it doesn't hold a candle to what Dilla and Nujabes were making. And that's because Nujabes and Dilla are not lo-fi hip-hop. They don't make lo-fi hip-hop. And I think putting them under that moniker is extremely disrespectful to their sound. There's an interview with a friend of J Dilla, House Juice, where he describes as calling him the godfather of lo-fi hip-hop is extremely disrespectful, especially considering what Dilla cared about and was going for with his music. And according to Toru from earlier, there was a point when Nujabes' music was starting to be called jazzy hip-hop, like they were trying to like describe like genre his music under that. And Nujabes replied with, "Isn't just hip-hop enough?" Because that's the thing. While yes, these guys played a hand in influencing this subgenre, it wouldn't be the way it is without them, but that was never what they were going for. They were just making hip-hop. And I don't know, to me, it feels very like gentrification type beat. When people take this sound that is literally just hip-hop, Nujabes is just hip-hop, that you're listening to hip-hop music, and try to dress it up in this newer term, you know what I mean? And it's especially a bother when like I read articles or like hear people describing Nujabes music, and they have this like, you could tell in the tonality that like they don't fuck with hip-hop like that. They'll like otherfy Nujabes' sound, talking about like how it's so artful and different and beautiful. They get real cerebral, and thus because of that it can't be hip-hop, as if hip-hop isn't artful and beautiful. Like what the fuck are we talking about? It's very much the crowd with specifically a negative tone saying, I don't listen to hip-hop, but Nujabes, hell yeah. Like do everyone a favor and sincerely, respectfully, shut the fuck. It's hip-hop. That's the music. That's what Nujabes makes. But even more importantly, in regards to this series and its themes, and what this series is trying to tell us, you have to understand the music has to be hip-hop. And let me explain why, but first, we need to go to a...
Internet Pitstop. of the internet.
So it has to be understood that Samurai Champloo isn't just samurais and hip-hop, but it's also Japanese culture and Japanese art mixing with Black American culture and Black American art. This is why you see Mugen doing breakdance moves, or even partly why his fighting style is so like off the cuff. You could say it's freestyled. It's why you see beatboxing samurais. It's why there's a whole episode about graffiti or tagging. But this connection and mixing of unlikely things goes even deeper than just the aesthetics. Samurai Champloo is championing the idea of different cultures and unlikely things and people mixing together and showing the beauty of this. And this theme carries into literally everything about this series. Real Ludo narrative type shit. And if you know me, that's like my whole thing. I'm media literacy's final boss. You feel me?
And while it could be coincidence, you could even apply this to the fact that the studio that made Samurai Champloo, Manglobe, their whole reason for calling themselves that is it's a rough translation of mangrove, which if you look into the definition is the idea of mixing elements to make a new ecosystem. Or if you take a look at the staff credits of this anime, just look at the sheer amount of staff that had their creative fingerprints all over this. A wide mix of people came together to make this series about mixing. Could be coincidence, but I think even at a production level, this show follows its themes.
Notice how all our three main characters here are completely different from each other in terms of personality, in terms of culture, in terms of morals. But also notice a lot of times the problems in episodes are solved because all three of them happen to be together. And they're all able to grow as characters because of them meeting each other, because they mixed. And yet also notice that while it's championing that theme, it takes place in the Edo period of Japan, which could be considered one of the strictest periods of Japan's history, as it was under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. In a sense, the government was run by a military regime. They had an authoritarian rule with an emphasis on maintaining the status quo, with policies that were led by conservatism and isolationism, and especially a big emphasis on keeping out any outside influences. Or in simpler terms, at least from what I can understand, besides being corrupt, if you were different or thought different than the status quo, you were casted out, forced to convert, or, you know, forced to log out, if you will. This time period didn't allow for things and people to mix, and thus Champloo's everything, its characters, its music choices, its themes, is in direct opposition to the time period's policies. And thus the series itself is also carrying a theme of anti-authoritarianism. For fuck's sake, the show literally opens with our main characters at first, because of their differences, them being very different cultures and people, them not mixing, right? And then what happens? They connect and mix on their shared hatred of the corrupt authority, being this governor who was trying to execute them. The show literally opens with its first lines going against a corrupt authority. So we have these themes of championing mixing cultures and differences, and also being anti-authoritarian, anti that there is a right way to do things, a status quo, if you will. And now notice how both these things are reflected in a lot of the episodes, with the main thread being that most of the problems and the real villain of the story of Samurai Champloo is the corrupt government. Pay attention to the types of characters throughout the series that they interact with. They help characters like a woman being forced into because the laws didn't allow for women to divorce their husbands, even when said husband is an abusive scumbag who sold her off to pay his debts. A woman who has to hide her religion because Christianity is illegal in this time period, who is also being forced into a marriage by a religious cult leader using Christianity as a tool to control, which is only working as good as it does because people can't legally practice a different religion. That's not part of the status quo. A pickpocket who is stealing money and eventually tries to sell some drugs because he wants to pay for medicine for his mom. He doesn't have enough money to pay for medicine that can literally save someone's life. Aren't we all glad that this immoral thing is just a thing of the prehistoric past and, is just fiction and not a real problem anymore? Yep, all of these characters that our characters are helping are where they are as a result of the corrupt government and its policies. But it's not all black and white, as Samurai Champloo is pretty nuanced too, as you'll also have characters like Ishimatsu and the artist dude.
While both of these characters are oppressed because of the system, they start doing things that aid in more oppression to get an advantage within the system.
And when they try to justify this by kind of having this passive energy to it, being very like, oh, well, that's just how things are, so I have to do this corrupt thing. The show always makes a point to have our main characters tell them that they are just making excuses for themselves, as they are only aiding in more corruption and oppression. Pay attention to some of the antagonists of the episodes. Oniwaka was just a dude who was taller and looked a little different, and he was attacked by mobs of people simply because he was different. He didn't fit in the status quo. But that mob is just perpetuating what the system has taught them, and this is what eventually drove him to despawning those people. He's put in jail, and then when he's taken out by that guy from the first episode who was friends with the corrupt governor's son to aid him into attacking our main characters. And you'll notice in this episode, Fu empathizes with him. Okuru was an Ainu villager whose village came under a disease, and instead of the government doing anything to help their village, they burned and despawned everyone. And rightfully, Okuru was upset. His whole family and people were despawned by a government official, and thus he despawned that government official. But then of course they frame him as the one who came under some madness, and he was the one who actually despawned the whole village, and now they have to get him for his crime. Sarah was a blind, skilled warrior who was forced to despawn our main characters. And I say forced because if she didn't, they would despawn her son. Who is they? The you get it. All of these characters, because of this corrupt system and its ideals, have become cultural minorities. The point here is clear. Samurai Champloo is anti-authority and pro-cultural diversity. Its themes and characters are there to shine a light on why this type of system and these types of policies and ideals are corrupt.
It only benefits those at the top and closest to it. Anyone who doesn't fit in that nice little box of the status quo, aka the minorities, they're all oppressed. The show has us empathize with these characters because of how the system has screwed them over, and champions whenever these characters go against the grain and stand against the system, against their oppressors.
Hence why the word Champloo isn't just there because it means to mix unlikely things, and that's the theme of the series, but also it's an Okinawan word. Okinawa was part of the Ryukyu Islands, which is also where Mugen is from, and at this time was separated from Japan, and the Okinawan people were very different from the Japanese. They were a minority culture, and that is why the music needs to be hip-hop music that involves mixing through, sampling, but it's also music that's made by a minority culture. The origins of that music comes from that minority culture's plights with their corrupt system. Hip-hop is also anti-authority, anti-status quo, also a connection from the past to the present.
Samurai Champloo is telling a story in the past about minorities being oppressed by a corrupt government and showing them standing against it. And hip-hop is a present day example of an art form that tells the story of minorities who have been oppressed by a corrupt government that only benefits the status quo, and showing them standing against it.
The same problems are connecting these two things. Hip-hop perfectly aligns with the themes of Samurai Champloo. That's why this shit is so cool. It's not just samurais and hip-hop go to look cool together, but it's also the themes of what hip-hop music represents and what this series is representing perfectly mixed together.
On the outside, these things might not look like they should go together at all. But as the series is trying to tell us, through understanding each other's differences, you come to realize that you actually share a connection. Or in Rizza's words from earlier, the connection is poetic.
And look, I'm doing this, as I said, I love Ludo narrative. I love making connections. I love finding the cool little subtext of art. I'm doing it because I genuinely find it exciting, and I think it's important to know these things. But I didn't really need to, because Dai Sato, the scriptwriter of Samurai Champloo, has literally spelled it out for us. He said in an interview, people asked me why we portrayed a black culture rather than samurai in Samurai Champloo. And I said that it is a story about minority culture. Hip-hop is a minority culture, and the members of Champloos were a counter or minority culture in the perspective of that time as well. And thus, I think the message that Champloo wants us to take home,
Overthrow the corrupt powers that be,
is to see the beauty of making connections and mixing, in the importance of cultural openness, not to be rigid and stay in our bubble, as understanding our differences and standing together is what makes us stronger against the powers that be. Samurai Champloo is saying that there isn't a right way, correct way to do things. There shouldn't be a status quo.
It wants us to not be passive to the authority, to the status quo. And it actively rewards whenever a character chooses to stand against that corrupt system and decides to carve their own path going against the grain.
A lot of other people have also noticed that another big theme in Samurai Champloo is the idea of that the journey is more important than the destination, as that is what happens in the plot of Samurai Champloo. And that's correct, but that's also aligns with the mixing theme. The journey is more important than the destination because on that journey you meet people, you experience, you make connections, you mix. I think this is why our story starts with Jin and Mugen, two very completely different people, different cultures, different personalities, different views, different fighting styles. And all they want to do is despawn each other. But Fu forces them to be together and forces them to mix. And because of that, throughout the series, they make change, positive change, and they only did it because the three of them were together. And that's why at the end of the series, when they've went on their arcs, they've grown together, they've become friends, they've connected, they've grown as people. When they do finally clash, like they've been saying they're gonna do from the beginning of the show, what happens? Their swords break because they mixed. They learned to respect each other and their differences. And when you do that, when you connect, when you mix, when you understand each other, when you have unity, there is no war. And yeah, I take Samurai Champloo as letting us know to not let the corrupt powers that be make us fall for their crafting of culture wars or to make us hate each other through our differences so that we're distracted from the real problem. It wants us to stand together against the oppressors and those who agree with them. Is this too heavy-handed? Will you two be cool with this? But this series and its themes and how it carries it goes even deeper. I still have another thing to talk about why this connection is so cool. Oh right, my bad. Let's talk about the power of art and or change. What I find to be the most powerful thing about art is its ability to make change and to truly reflect its themes into the real world. And Champloo did exactly that. You can find interviews with Watanabe talking about how when Champloo was first released, it wasn't immediately appreciated, especially in Japan. And he feels it's because at the time, anime fans were otakus, only otakus. 2000s and weren't really into things like hip-hop. In his words, hip-hop was more part of the delinquent subculture, basically cool people. He says at this time, these two cultures were common enemies. Remember, this is the early 2000s. Anime is not as widely accepted and, you know, considered cool and mainstream as it is now. But as he traveled the world, he noticed that the types of people who ended up liking Champloo were people of this delinquent youth culture, as he speaks about. Why? Because of its music, and also because of Watanabe's ability of making cool shit. Champloo brought in people who wouldn't typically be into anime. Samurai Champloo got two cultures who were common enemies to mix. And of course, if you look at the anime fandom today, it's forever changed. It's more widely accepted, it's more popular. There's people of all kinds of walks of life now who outwardly enjoy anime. And a big part of it is Watanabe's willingness to mix unlikely things in all of his work. But I think Samurai Champloo, especially as a piece of art, is powerful because its themes are about mixing unlikely things. And it literally, in real life, made unlikely people mix. As a piece of art, it embodied its themes so well that it carried over and transcended into real life. In a sense, it didn't just talk the talk, it walked the walk. Am I the only one that thinks this shit is so cool that you can make something that says this thing and then that thing carries over into real life? Like it did the thing. It did what it. I think the most powerful thing about art is that it can leave such an impact that it actively changes the world. I want to be completely transparent about this. I don't know if there's much that I can do, but I am trying to learn. I am trying to understand. And so while I am small in the grand scheme of things, I do have a voice. I have a voice with people that listen. And so I want to mention this because while I was doing research, I was reminded of the story of Darrien Hunt. Back in 2014, Darrien was unjustifiably murdered by the police, and he was wearing a Mugen cosplay, and thus he was carrying a fake plastic sword of Mugens. I think you can tell by that what kind of racist shit happened because of these pigs. And as you can also probably guess, they got away with it scot-free. They didn't suffer any problems. And since then, his family has continually tried to get his case reopened because it was clearly unjust and racially motivated. And again, I don't know what I can do. I don't know if I can help, but I don't think it hurts to have pure intentions and try to do something. If you're still watching at this point, and if it isn't too much on you, there's a petition trying to get his case reopened. His family put up the petition. If you can, click the link in description. I think there'll be a link up here too. Sign your name. As you can see here, they're getting real close to hitting one of their goals, and I just want to try to help if any way I can. And if you're interested in knowing more about his case and just being more educated on what happened, there's a great video by American Wounds that tells the whole story. I would highly recommend checking it out. It'll also be in the description if you're interested. If you could just add your name to that petition, it would mean a lot. And I'd really appreciate it if you could help. Thank you. Thank you so much for deciding to light your bonfire here at this little corner of the internet. If you like what you saw today, please give me a like and a subscribe. I always appreciate that. I don't benefit a lot from going as hard as I do with the effects and the green screen and doing all this stuff. YouTube doesn't really reward that. So if you can, it genuinely does help when you just leave a comment. It gets the video more out there and thus helps me in my battle against the forever enigma that is the algorithm gods that I just, leave a comment about your favorite track from this anime, or just leave a comment about whatever. It genuinely helps, and I appreciate it. I'm trying to get 500,000 subscribers this year. If you can help me with that, I'd really appreciate it. Or if you're interested in supporting me the best way you can and getting more benefits like extra videos and stuff, the best way to do that is on my Patreon. There'll be a link up here or in the description if you just want to help your boy out. And if you're an absolutely crazy person like all these people you happen to see here, you can join my highest tier on Patreon. At that highest tier, you get a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, you get a pixel art character that shows throughout and at the end of all my videos. And actually, we have a few new people that we have to announce, so give me a sec to show them. My boy Liam here decided to fuse two of the coolest things also known to ever exist, Krillin and Squirtle with the shades, and thus you get this. I love it. Thank you. Then we got my boy Icy Baklava, who got a shiny Zubat. Don't know why, but I respect a Zubat lover because most people hate Zubat. Then we got Wizard here who got his pixel art based off the GOAT, Lofi. And then we have a Gen 3 frequent study streamer, Squowl Owl, who just got their character based off their PFP, which is this owl with the scarf. And I really like the way it came out. I think it's a great addition to this little area. We also got David Park, who just asked for his PFP to be made into a pixel art. And I think it came out really cool. Like, he kind of looks like an Initial D character that I can't put my finger on right now, but it looks like an Initial D character. And I'll fuck with that. Hopefully he fucks with Initial D. Shout out to him. Once again, if you're interested in being one of these people that hangs out with me throughout my videos and at the end, you can do that at my highest tier on Patreon. But with all that being said, thank you so much for coming to this little pit stop on the corner of the internet. Peace.